I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of The Naturalist Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 74 stat.
That was the beginning of my problems.
He died doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
But I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a
gotta get him out of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hey guys, thanks you for tuning in to another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. 2 live streams today, but it's all good. There's a lot of stuff happening in the world, so lots to talk about. We just averted World War III for almost, triggering an Article 5 from a Ukrainian missile, which is kind of funny. They were telling us it was a Russian missile, but it turned out to be a Ukrainian missile that landed in Poland. But we're all still here, so I guess we should be grateful about that. Anyway, I figured it would be a good time to have, one of the foremost experts that I know on, foreign policy in general, but then specifically having to do with China, because the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire put out a couple tweets earlier this week that really ruffled a lot of feathers and started a whole controversy, got a bunch of people talking about us. So wanted to talk about some of that stuff. He is, of course, Pat MacFarlane, and I can't believe I forgot the name of your new show. I was almost going to say Liberty Weekly, but you just changed the name of your show. It's not Liberty Weekly anymore. What is it now?
Yeah, well, you don't know how many times I've messed that up myself. It's Vital Dissent now with Patrick MacFarlane. It's on screen. You can see the title is in the lower left corner, and it's covered by my name tag.
Oh yeah, should have removed the names, but oh well. Vital Dissent with Patrick MacFarlane. So how you doing anyway, Patrick? How's everything going?
Yeah, doing good, man. I've been a little behind on stuff lately, but I'm getting ready for a trial because I'm an attorney in regular life, and the world goes on.
Yeah, I know. I'm starting a new job finally on November 28th. I haven't had a job since May, which has been by choice, but I'm gonna start working full time again. So won't be able to schedule episodes as frequently. What kind of sucks is I don't know if it's because I'm a Russian propagandist or a Chinese puppet or what, but I have, ever since I left my job in May, my viewership and everything just dropped right off. I used to be getting really good views, and now I'm lucky if I hit 1,000 views on a video. And it was right. I remember I did a show with Ryan in March about all the political connections to Ukraine, with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and Mitt Romney and all that. And after that, things started going downhill a little bit. And then ever since May, everything's dropped off. And I'll get a couple videos that get really good views, but outside of that, nothing. And it sucks because I thought, okay, I'm going to take some time off, and so I'll finally be able to schedule all the interviews I want. But everything is just dried up over the summer. And now that I'm going back to work soon, things are picking up again, and I'm finally getting interviews. It's how life goes, when you have time, you can't, nothing seems to come around. And then when things come around, you don't have time to, to do them anymore. It's just how life is, I guess.
Yeah, it is weird that way. I mean, I kind of, my numbers are down a little bit too, even with the rebrand. And I think it might be because of the fall, because people are busy. They got kids going back to school, and I'm busy myself. But it just in general, I don't know if it's the lack of vitamin D in the sun, but I've been a little down lately, just not really, you can only go on for so long thinking about the impending doom of the world, and it starts to get to you. So it's like going to things, and I had the pleasure of meeting you twice this summer. Getting to go to things like that and networking really is important to charge your batteries.
Oh yeah, no, and all the fights that take place on Twitter when we're all actually in the same room. I mean, not that you and I ever got in fights on Twitter, but the broader liberty movement, you think everybody hates each other, but then you go to these things where you have people from Reason and people from Cato and people from the Libertarian Institute, people from the Mises Caucus, and they're all hanging out in the same room and laughing and being friendly. It's very refreshing to see that and to remind ourselves that, you know, Twitter isn't real life. I know that's a thing we say all the time, but it's also actually true when you go to these things and actually meet people.
Yeah, dude. Today actually I downloaded this app that blocks websites during the workday, and I think it's called Cold Turkey, but it locks me from using Twitter during work hours. And today was pretty cool, so maybe I'll keep doing it.
You don't even have to get banned off of Twitter like I did. You can just block it, you know.
Well, if we keep talking about the Uyghur genocide, maybe we'll get banned from Twitter.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I guess let's just start off with that, even though there's more pressing news going on, but we'll get to that at the end. Let's start off with the Uyghur stuff. So I'm going to pull up a tweet here that the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire put out. And this caused a lot of chaos and made a lot of people upset. It says, the information surrounding the Uyghur genocide is sketchy at best. They just use it to manipulate you into hating a group of people that you know nothing about and to propagandize you into supporting any future conflict with them. China is not a threat to your freedom. Currently, that has 429 quote tweets and just over 2,200 likes. But lots of people got really upset about that. Lots of people in the Liberty movement. And I didn't actually make that tweet, but I did help come up with the idea because a couple other guys who run the account now, we were talking about how, man, like the right is really gearing up for war with China and they're really not backing off from it. So we should start, you know, injecting some of our, you know, our opinion into the zeitgeist and try to get them talking about things, especially while the Republican primary is going to start heating up and everything. Like we should push this into the conversation so that they at least, you know, have a different opinion being shown to them, because for the most part, the left doesn't actually have much of a different opinion about it. And then, you know, even the dissident right wing news, I mean, they're some of the hardest pushers of this stuff. So there's nowhere else that they're going to get this opinion from unless we do something. So as usual, Libertarian Party of New Hampshire led with chaos and pushed that into the conversation and blew everything up. But you and I actually did an episode, I think 7 months ago, where we talked about this a little bit. I watched your documentary called Stain of the Century. And really what it comes down to is that we're not denying anything. We're not saying that anything is impossible or is definitively not happening. There just hasn't been proof given for these outrageous claims they're making. And in the real world, when you're going to make outrageous claims, and especially if you're going to act on them like we have by you know, sanctioning and putting you know, trade restrictions and stuff on countries and considering them our number one enemy and being really aggressive toward them, there should be substantial evidence for these claims, and there really isn't. So I was wondering if you could just say right now, what is definitively true about how the Uyghurs are being treated in China? Like, what do we actually know for a fact beyond just eyewitness testimony? What has been actually investigated and confirmed to be the case?
Well, I think that the Chinese government does admit a lot of things that are occurring in Xinjiang. And I guess just from the outset, just so people who aren't familiar with this and haven't read or looked into it or listened to our first interview, which actually I think is one of the best, in my opinion, the best I've ever given on this topic. Xinjiang is the westernmost province in China. The name means the new frontier. The Uyghurs are the largest ethnic minority that lives in that region. It's a region about the size of France. Most of it is kind of a deserty area. It's not very, you know, it's not lush farmland or anything like that. So the Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic minority. There's other ethnic groups in the area, including the Han Chinese, but the Uyghurs are the largest. I think there's around 13 or 14 million of them. And it's been claimed for a few years now that the Chinese Communist Party is committing a genocide against the Uyghurs. And the one thing that we can say is happening that's been admitted by the Chinese is that there is an assimilation campaign that is in progress in Xinjiang. There are people in jail-like detention facilities. We don't know how many people there are. Adrian Zenz, which is the West's foremost expert on this, who, as far as I know, has never been to Xinjiang. He's a German anthropologist, and he says and has made this claim, and the media just ran with it, that there is more than 1 million Uyghurs in these detention facilities. And we can't say that for sure. It was a study, like the banner study that they quote when they say that number is based on interviews with a total of 8 people. And they went through, what they did is they went through these villages in Xinjiang and they interviewed people, one person, and they said, well, how many people from your community are missing? And they estimated how many people were missing. And so they went to 8 communities and did that, and then extrapolated the number. And then they claim basically, oh, well, we're estimating over 1 million people. This is corroborated because we got a leaked document from someone connected to a terrorist group that supposes to be, it purports to be a Chinese Communist Party internal government demographic document listing the population in these facilities. Maybe at one point in time, I don't know if there were 1 million people, but that would be almost 1/10 of the entire Uyghur population in Xinjiang. So it's very, it's an unproven claim by people that aren't incredibly trustworthy. But we do know there are people in these camps. China says that this is a part of a terrorism fighting program. And so, I mean, read American War on Terror, because the Chinese modeled their war of terror after ours. There were communications after 9/11 between the United States government and the Chinese government talking about how they support our war on terror. They try to emulate it. But this goes back into, I mean, really long history of Uyghur unrest in the area. And there's this group called ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, and they were on the U.S. terrorist list of being a terrorist organization, but they were recently removed from being on that list. And China views them as a terrorist group. They're a separatist group, and what they purport to do is to free Xinjiang from Chinese rule and create a separate state. And so if Uyghur groups will call Xinjiang, they will call it East Turkestan, and they have their own government in exile that is supported by the United States. The Eastern Turkestan, I don't know if they call it the government in exile, but it connects to a bunch of NGOs like the World Uyghur Congress. And these NGOs receive funding and support from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a U.S. NGO that basically is admitted to be doing what the CIA used to do covertly, except now it does it overtly. And basically, it's how the CIA instigates regime change in foreign countries. So to circle around back to your question, after giving some of that background, we do know that there's people in facilities. According to UN documents, the average period of detention for people in these facilities is from 2 to 18 months. So this is a catch and release program where Uyghurs are put into these facilities. If we believe the Chinese Communist Party, they're only taught vocational skills, and they're de-radicalized in a way that is supposed to bring them closer to Han Chinese culture. And then they're released back to their homes. And this is because when Deng Xiaoping instituted these reforms in China, it brought an immense number, almost 1 billion people, out of destitute poverty. And there was concern about making sure that every single part of China was able to modernize and enjoy in that raised standard of living. And in a way, Xinjiang kind of got left behind a little bit. And it's a very rural culture that is different and separate from the Chinese. And so they're attempting to bring Xinjiang back into the country and to modernize it. And a large part of this too is the Chinese land-based Belt and Road Initiative, where they're really trying to create an economic corridor that runs through the Islamic countries and into Europe to bring China into the world stage and become, a multipolar power. And so on one level, if the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is like the crown jewel of their economic development program, it really wouldn't make sense for the Chinese Communist Party to wholesale murder Uyghurs, which are they're Muslim. So it just doesn't exactly make sense. And in fact, there were a lot of resolutions. There were a lot of countries that were signing resolutions condemning the Chinese Communist Party for the Uyghur, their mistreatment and genocide, claimed genocide of the Uyghurs. But there were even more countries who signed a pledge supporting China. And I believe it was, I don't know if it was 72 countries versus 22 countries. And of those 72 countries, a large portion of them were Islamic countries.
So obviously that's bad. Even on a, even that. This is what drives me crazy about all this stuff is, if you say Saddam Hussein has WMDs that he's going to give to Al Qaeda without any proof, that should be met with the answer, okay, give me some evidence, otherwise I'm not going to believe you. People take that as, oh, you mean you think that Saddam Hussein is a great guy and that the Iraqi government, protects human rights and cares about human flourishing and property and, life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Like, no, I don't think that. I don't think Saddam Hussein's a good guy at all. I think he's a brutal, murdering dictator. And I think the Iraqi government sucked under his rule. And I don't have anything nice to say about the Chinese government, the CCP. I know they're an authoritarian, autocratic nightmare. However, that doesn't mean that you can make unsubstantiated claims without pushback and proof, some sort of evidence. And that's, every time with this type of stuff, when you say, okay, we're looking for some concrete evidence that this is true, that's what you're always met with is like, oh, you're a CCP shill. You think what's happening to the Uyghurs is good. No, of course not. Like, we're upset about the government in New Hampshire that it's not free enough. Like, of course we hate the CCP. But first of all, the CCP is in China. I'm more worried about the FBI and the government here in the United States that can actually take away my liberties. I'm not worried about the CCP or about, the Iranian government or the Russian government. Like, they're not really my concern. But also, like, if you're gonna make crazy claims, what's the saying? It's extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This should be just kind of basic stuff.
The funny thing is that, man, my voice is really going to hell because I almost died when you were doing your intro. I did that thing where you breathe in your own saliva.
Oh boy.
Anyways, my apologies for that. But yeah, so it's just funny because when LPNH put out that tweet, there were a lot of people that were outraged in the responses, the replies. But I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm an expert on the situation. I've read a lot about it, and I feel like I'm versed enough to explain it and to make cogent arguments about it. And I'm familiar with a lot of what is said about it in the topics and statistics. I'm not an expert on it, but a lot of these people who are responding don't know the first thing about it, and they know that they saw a BBC report which had all these scary quotes from Adrian Zenz. And we know that they probably saw there was a footage that was going around of a bunch of Uyghur prisoners in blue, and they were kneeling by some boxcars or something like that. And of course, that evokes very strong imagery.
Right.
And a lot of assumptions as well. But what a lot of these people probably didn't know is that even the most staunch Uyghur supporters and activists, even they are not claiming wholesale killings by the CCP. They don't even try to make that legal case. Under the Genocide Convention, because when you're talking about this, what it really boils down to is the Genocide Convention. there are 5 types of genocides. One is killing members of the group. Well, we don't have, widespread wholesale killings. 2 is causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group. Now, they haven't tried to make that case on a legal case. 3 is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And that in the last part of that, the in part part, is what they try to say. I mean, technically, the killing of one person, just by reading this, the killing of one person could be destroying a group. So they don't try to make that case either. That would be like your Dachau. That would be your Auschwitz or something like that. A camp where people are getting, they're starving to death, dropping. They have all these physical ailments, or they're being exterminated. So that's in the first 3. 4 would be imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And this is the element that they try to make the case on. And We'll go through that. But number 5 is forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, which might be plausible if it wasn't admitted that, whatever children are going to these boarding schools are being returned to their communities. It's only for a period of time. And furthermore, if that were to be genocide against, if that charge of genocide were to be sustainable, well, then the United States better look behind them, right? Because we did that to the Native Americans. Canada has done that. Australia is currently doing that with the Aboriginals, I believe.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of that. So they try to hang their hat entirely on number 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And that goes into Adrian Zenz's cooked numbers about IUD insertions, which he basically, I think we covered this in the first interview, but his claim is that I think it was in 2019 or 2018, he said that 87% of all net IUD insertions happened in Xinjiang, which is impossible. Well, first of all, what does net IUD insertions even mean, right? He's saying that of the number of women in China who had an IUD removed versus the number of women in China that had an IUD inserted. And for people who don't know, an IUD is an intrauterine device. It's a birth control device that goes inside the uterus and prevents births. Now, we all know about the one-child policy in China. Absolutely abhorrent program. I don't know like the details about it. I'm sure that there was, coercive family planning and surveillance and maybe forced abortions. I don't really know. Well, that policy never applied to the Uyghurs. That was retroactively applied a few years ago. And that accounted for a slowing of the birth rate of Uyghurs. So that was applied retroactively. This net IUD number that Adrian Zenz, the think tanks and the defense industries named expert on this issue, well, he conflated this percentage, 87%, when the reality is that he shifted a decimal wrong and did his math wrong. And the real number is 8.7%. So 8.7% of all net IUD insertions in China in that year occurred in Xinjiang and not 87%. So just that mistake right there. And he tried to correct the record, but the damage was already done. And Max Blumenthal and Gareth Porter at the Gray Zone really covered this a whole lot. So the people that were rage responding to the LPNH tweet didn't seem aware of the fact that no one is saying that the Uyghurs are being murdered outright. Some people who were a little smarter than others were saying, well, genocide isn't just murdering people. It's also, doing these other things. And, the counter to that is, yeah, okay, well, they haven't made that case either. Adrian Zenz going through all the stuff that I just talked about. But also there was this, the Uyghur Tribunal, which is a bunch of British barristers, they're British attorneys who have formed this NGO. They were presented evidence by Uyghur activist organizations, and they came out with this 64-page report that that was gone through by Peter Lee in a piece that the Libertarian Institute published. It's called "The Case Against Uyghur Genocide," and Peter Lee goes through that report and goes through how the Uyghur Tribunal actually went through all their evidence in detail, and they concluded that none of the 5 genocide parts that I listed earlier, that none of them matched the evidence, that none of the evidence was able to meet the burden of proof that they set forward. But they shoehorned in this number 4, preventing births. And there's a lot of contrary evidence. I don't know if there was a defense in this mock trial thing that they had, but the case was really weak, and Peter Lee goes through and says exactly why. But another conflict of interest to keep in mind is just that the Uyghur Tribunal was funded in large part by the World Uyghur Congress, which in a large part has NED officials on staff and receives funding from the NED. And so there's a lot of suspect things that are going on here. And another thing about this charge of genocide itself, in the International Criminal Court, which is the court that was established by the Rome Treaty, and China is not a signatory to the Rome Treaty, so this court that would charge genocide does not have jurisdiction over China because they haven't signed the treaty. Furthermore, the International Criminal Court does not try genocide cases in absentia, which means that in order for them to try a genocide case, there has to be a defendant, and the defendant has to be present and has to contest the charges. So if we were to go through any real kind of judicial proceeding about this, 1, the court that would do it doesn't have jurisdiction, and 2, China would have the right to present their own its own defense. So,
yeah. So I mean, it kind of sucks. There's not really any good source of information that's reliable, right? You're either trusting the CCP or the State Department or this very biased group of people that have political interests against the Chinese government. It would be nice if there was some sort of independent research that could take place to find out what's actually going on. But right now, there's just basically you can't trust anybody except for what I guess they admit to is the only thing that we're going to know is for sure true. Outside of that, it's a lot of speculation. And I mean, speculation wouldn't be such a big deal if we weren't, making foreign policy decisions based upon those speculations, and we weren't firing up millions of people to feel a certain way about a country based on those speculations. I mean, you could call the WMDs in Iraq speculations because there wasn't proof. And then, I mean, you've probably seen that clip of Rumsfeld on Stephen Colbert, where he basically admitted that, yeah, of course we didn't actually know. It was intelligence, and intelligence is always, iffy or whatever. So, like, I mean, these speculations have serious repercussions on policy and the thoughts of millions of people. So they're not things you can just throw out there and, just without any proof or anything. So that's really what this comes down to is like, if something's going on, you got to have concrete evidence because the repercussions of what you say are really big.
Well, and furthermore, we know that these Uyghur genocide claims and specifically the claims of crimes against humanity, which is a different thing than genocide. And actually, to respond, there was one person who I had a back and forth with who was saying that while they're trying to destroy the Uyghur culture, which on some level might be true, there's more evidence for that than there is for the genocide claim. But destroying a culture is not genocide, right? Because there's a real definition for it. And so furthermore, but one of the reasons why it's so important to analyze this is because the allegation of Uyghur genocide is the crown jewel that justifies U.S. economic sanctions against China. And it was cited directly in the newest round of sanctions against China, specifically against forced labor. It's called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, I believe is the title. And Joe Biden signed it into law, and it just was applied in June. And it creates a presumption that every single good that is made or manufactured in Xinjiang, in whole or in part, is illegal to sell in the United States unless the United States inspects it. So it's a rebuttable presumption, but the US has to inspect it to affirm that it wasn't made with forced labor. And I think it's clear and convincing evidence. Don't quote me on the burden of proof to get the goods in, but this is a huge, it stifles industry in Xinjiang. And of course, I'm against any form of forced labor, but you would have to assume that labor in China, that the sale of goods to Xinjiang that are manufactured in Xinjiang probably supports some kind of industry in Xinjiang that people need to rely on to feed their families. So,
yeah. Well, I don't know. It's not like this type of issue is ever going to be easy to talk about because people. Yeah. What bugs me though is, it's the same thing we're hearing about Ukraine. So, every time I hear justification for some sort of intervention or economic sanctions or whatever is like, well, this time it's really important because they're hurting innocent people. And it's like, when has that ever not been the excuse for getting involved somewhere? Like Vietnam, that was one of the big reasons we got to stop communism from spreading around the world, or Iraq, it wasn't just the WMDs. It was also, look at how awful Saddam Hussein is and how his people are being treated. And then with Syria, Libya, all of it, it's always about the innocent people who are getting hurt or whatever. So I think a little bit of callousness is actually what we need. I mean, it's just easier to convince people of that. I mean, because I, by nature, actually do care about people all over the world. It's kind of my intrinsic feeling. I do feel bad for everyone everywhere. But at the end of the day, like you can't do anything that would help, by getting involved militarily. So I think it's easier to kind of weaponize the selfishness and callousness of the American people to be like, look, it sucks, but what are you going to do? And I don't know. I feel like, that's why Trump had a little bit of success because, he didn't make the Republicans anti-war by any stretch, but he did kind of shift the Overton window with what was acceptable. And his perspective was much more of the calloused, like, what are you going to do? We got to take care of ourselves and we can't worry about everybody else. And what do you think, though? Like, do you try to go the humanitarian way, or how do you go?
I guess it depends on who I'm talking to. Sure. I mean, I'm of the right, so I rely more on the callous apathy, I suppose. It's hard because people, especially libertarians, are so anti-communist that they're willing to believe anything that they hear about China.
Right.
and that's hard too, because, of course I don't like communism, but I've become more and more tolerant of it existing because I've found that of the people that we can rely on to be anti-war across the board, communists are pretty high up that list. So it's interesting. And the more that I've actually looked into China, the more that I've seen the counter side is never really presented. And I'm not, denying the horrors of the Great Leap Forward or anything like that, but I also like things like that. I mean, there might be some kind of evidence that it wasn't an intentional thing. It was just what happens when you try to put in communism in place, and I'm sure maybe part of that was intentional. I don't know. I haven't studied it enough, so don't like go jumping down my throat, people in the comments. But there is another side,
Yeah.
and so it's, but it goes back to what Jeff Deist said in that the infamous Blood and Soil speech. If people have been in this movement long enough to remember that speech, I think he gave it to a place in Brazil or in South America or something like that. And Jeff Deist was saying essentially like, we need to not be libertarian universalists and try to create a new libertarian man. We have to acknowledge the fact that people around the world have things that matter to them, and things that matter to people are not abstract ideas. It's family, it's God, it's country, it's blood and soil, is what he said that got him in trouble. But it's true. We have to realize that people in other parts of the country, or excuse me, in other parts of the world, are going to desire to live under systems that are not libertarian, and therefore decentralization and self-determination is the goal.
Yeah, I mean, I see how it's very easy to fall into that trap as a libertarian because, you start realizing how important freedom and liberty is, and you want it for everybody and everybody at all costs so much that you're willing to, carpet bomb a city full of innocent people to spread freedom or whatever. Like that, that's where it ultimately leads to. And I could see where the logic goes astray. Like it makes sense, but yeah, I mean, it's one of the hardest pills to swallow about foreign policy is just, it sucks. Like, yeah, shit is going to happen around the world. But getting involved in a military way doesn't fix it. And we have this World War II complex, that everything is Nazi Germany and everything is Imperial Japan, which were both awful dictatorships for sure. But we have, because of how that war went and just the way the 20th century was shaped around it, we just think of everything has to be World War II. It has to be ultimate surrender. It has to be, America taking the front stage and leading the world. And it's just not true. Like, I mean, every war since World War II, most of them have been disasters, like all of them have been. I mean, and I wouldn't, I know we have kind of unpopular opinions about World War II to most people. Like, I think we could have stayed out of it. But even if you're going to consider World War II a success, it's really hard to claim the rest, have been since then. So this idea that America has to take the front stage and just obliterate all opposition is, I don't know, it's just really unhealthy, especially now. Like, I mean, I think it's just super obvious that it doesn't work.
Well, and even the notion that we have the moral ability to is suspect, because Dave Smith was in this the shit show of a YouTube debate with, I forget, the Sitch or somebody on YouTube this week. I did catch that, but they kept saying whataboutism, which I think is when you're adding context to a certain situation, this claim of whataboutism is just what petulant children do. But it really is. What position is the United States to be lecturing China on human rights? I mean, yeah. We just slaughtered Muslims wholesale for the last 30 years. And in addition, right now, the United States has Afghans in prison camps, essentially, in Kosovo, because after we withdrew from Afghanistan, there were tons of Afghans that we had recruited to be part of the Kabul government. And now we couldn't just leave them behind, because there would be reprisals. So now we took them, and they're sitting in a prison camp in Kosovo. And there's talks of bringing them to Guantanamo. Wait, that was the Haitians. Sorry. We were going to put the Haitians in Guantanamo Bay after we go in and save them from all the gangs that are ruling the country, because we've been intervening in that country for the last century. But we literally, we have Afghans in these facilities, and they're there indefinitely, and they can't leave, and so that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. The funny thing is, you said just America should look at itself more. All this talk about Putin maybe going to use a tactical nuke or something, which he has said he's not planning to. But if he did, who in the world in history has actually dropped nukes on civilians? Like, just the United States were the only ones who have done it. So just the hypocrisy is kind of amazing. Just to finish up on China, I know you and I really were unimpressed with Blake Masters because of things he was saying about China, but I just want to talk about the hubris of, being upset that the Chinese are upset that we're doing drills in the South China Sea and sailing warships through the Taiwan Strait. I mean, if the shoe were on the other foot and China were sailing ships between Cuba and Florida and, right up to the coast of California, we would not have that. And I talked to Scott Horton about this a little bit. Rex Tillerson, when he was Secretary of State, he was saying that China is threatening the United States dominance of the Pacific Ocean, not the United States or the United States allies, just the dominance of the Pacific Ocean. So to act like China is going to be landing on the California beaches, or to be upset that they're, pissed off at us at all while we're doing all this really inflammatory stuff is just kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the sheer ridiculousness of Blake Masters to claim in that Dave Smith interview that, or suggest the possibility that China might be landing soldiers on the coast of California. Now, I replayed that segment of the interview like 3 times to make sure that I heard it right, because I wanted to see if there was any sarcasm in that, and I didn't really pick up any sarcasm in it. But the obvious quip to that, or the obvious response to that, is, well, listen, there's only one country who's sailing warships off the other country's coast, and that is the United States sailing warships off the coast of China. Now, the Taiwan Strait, I think at its closest point is 100 kilometers off the coast of mainland China. And the U.S. sails their warships on the Taiwan side, but there's a median line. And so presumably the median line is an artificial line that I believe we created between Taiwan and China. So the U.S. warships are sailing in between the median line and the coast of Taiwan, which goes to reason that they're maybe 80 kilometers, maybe 60 kilometers off the coast of mainland China. That's really damn close. And we're sailing warships through that strait at least around once a month. And that's pretty often. So yeah, it's just, I did see a map the other day that it took the number of military bases that are near to China and superimposed them on the coast of the United States and proposed the question of like, well, what would our response be to this situation? And it's absurd.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the thing that's funny is a lot of right-wingers can see that this is going on with Russia. They're like, why, it's thousands of miles from us. We're right on their border. Like, why do we care? But if it's to our west instead of to our east, then it's an issue for some reason. So
it's even further east.
Yeah. Yeah, no, further east, technically. Yeah,
I think the reason for that is that you and I, Reed, we've grown up hating China our whole lives. I mean, there's always been jokes about, oh, Chinese crap made. If you're a blue collar guy, it's always the joke that, oh, we have these shit products that are from China and China's ripping us off and all this stuff. It was really kind of weaponized by Donald Trump, but I really think that's it. At least for the right wing, is, your dad growing up your whole life talking about cheap shit from China or cheap Chinese tools or parts that are from China that suck. It's so easy for people to glob onto this.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but it also exists with Russia. And for some reason, right wingers who are historically really hawkish on Russia, they've been able to snap out of it. I don't know if it's just because the left has been so retarded on it the last several years or what. But, I said earlier, the left doesn't really have much of a difference of position on China from the right. And I meant the mainstream left. Like, there are some people like Abby Martin or Max Blumenthal who are informed on this and know what's going on. But if we're just talking about the typical binary left and right in America, the left hates Russia and the right is kind of ambivalent about it. It doesn't really understand why they hate him so much. But then China, most of the left and the right both hate China. Like, I mean, your average liberal isn't going to say anything good about China. I mean, the amount of people who are anti-war leftists or tankies is pretty small. But yeah, so let's talk about Russia a little bit. So yesterday, so my understanding so far is that Russia launched an attack on Ukraine, and Ukraine sent sent a missile to intercept a Russian missile, and it landed in Poland and killed 2 people. Is that accurate? Is that what happened so far?
Well, I've been pretty busy with work this week, so I haven't been able to follow it as close as some, but that is roughly my understanding of what we know in a situation where the facts are not clear at the moment. I do know that it seems like Zelensky has kind of kept on this narrative that it was a Russian missile that hit Poland. But from my understanding, it seems like Dave DeCamp, he was saying in his episode from yesterday, last night, saying that it seemed like it was an S-300 rocket, that some people had analyzed the parts, and it might have been, even if it is a rocket of Russian make, Ukrainians still have a large number of Russian missiles that, that are left over, that are Russian manufactured. So I don't know. It really just seems like, if you just look at the facts, right? I mean, this is on the far western side of Ukraine. It's very close to Polish. If it was an intentional Russian attack, which I don't think there's evidence for, but it seems like Ukraine might be putting forward, it wouldn't. Why attack Poland for such low stakes? Why not hit a NATO base in Poland or something like that? Why hit 2 civilians in a rural area with an anti-air missile or something to that effect? Now, maybe it was a mistake. If it was a mistake, that's another thing. I mean, it's not an attack where I could see that you could, if it was an attack, you have a case for Article 5, possibly. So it just doesn't, yeah.
So, yeah, how does that work if it so it has to be an intentional attack for Article 5? If it's a mistake, it doesn't trigger Article 5. Is that how that works?
Well, I mean, along with everything in the law, there's no definite answer. It depends, or how can we construe this? So I would say the case for invoking Article 5 would be stronger if it was an intentional attack. I don't know if it's actually, I don't have the text of Article 5 in front of me, but from what I understand, if member countries, this is just my rough understanding, if member countries believe that their state is threatened by an external force, they can invoke Article 4, which convenes a meeting where they debate and make their case for why Article 5 has been triggered.
Gotcha. Because I saw a lot of people last night saying this is Article 5, this, we have to answer the call, blah, blah, blah. And then they found out it was Ukraine, and I was like, so does this still trigger an Article 5? Does NATO have to go into war against Ukraine now? Like, this wasn't how I was expecting to arrive at peace with Russia, but
Yeah, no kidding. We all ally with Russia to destroy the rest of Ukraine.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, but it's amazing seeing the propaganda machine that's really, it's really pushing us closer to, direct hot war with Russia. And I can't believe it, because I'll be honest, when this all started unfolding, first of all, I didn't think Russia was actually going to invade. I was one of those people. But then after this, after everything started unfolding, I was like, okay, come on. There's no way anyone's this stupid and actually wants direct war between the United States and Russia. I mean, there's just no way. But at every turn, I've been proven wrong. Every possible escalation aside from attacking Russia has happened. It's just more. And what is it, like a $38 billion bill or something that they're proposing right now to send to Ukraine, somewhere around there?
Yeah, and they were talking about passing either a $50 or $60 billion bill just to cover in advance next year. But that was being discussed before the midterms to be passed during the lame duck session. And now I don't know if they've figured that while they still have enough support in the House that they can pass everything that they want. But it seems like I think his name is Kevin McCarthy, was going to be the new House Minority Leader. And he made a statement saying, well, if under a Republican-controlled House, they're not just going to be willing to write a blank check for Ukraine. And then so all the establishment freaked out, and they wanted to get their Ukraine aid passed beforehand in the lame duck session before the handover of the Congress. And so, yeah, it's just an immense amount of money. We've already made, people have said that our spending on Ukraine, our aid to Ukraine, has surpassed the Russian military budget, I think, for 2020 or 2019. Yep. That's not defense spending. It's not that U.S. direct kinetic aid has surpassed the Russian military budget. It's the total aid. The total aid, including the budgetary support for all the welfare programs in Ukraine, basically all the money that, without this money, the Ukraine government would collapse. And so people have made the argument to me, especially when I was doing my TikTok videos every day. They were saying, well, it should be up to Ukraine whether or not they end the war. And it's like, no, motherfucker. Like, if the entire Ukrainian war effort wouldn't exist without support from the United States and the US taxpayer, I think that we should have a say. We do de facto, right? Because if we stop doing that, they would have to have peace because the government would implode. So,
yeah.
Have you listened to Douglas McGregor a bit? Like when he goes on Scott Horton or
I
Judge
haven't heard him on Scott Horton. He was on with Tulsi Gabbard, right, on Fox News a couple nights ago.
I didn't see that, but I've been following Douglas McGregor. He goes on with Judge Napolitano pretty often.
Him and Scott Ritter both, yeah.
Well, McGregor has a YouTube channel where all he does is he 24/7 live streams his recent interviews that he's had. So if you just go on YouTube and find that, but he is talking a lot about the Russian winter offensive. And I've found, McGregor has inside information. He still has sources from his time in the military on the ground. So I would say he's probably putting pieces together with that. I found McGregor to be like very pro-Rush. It seems like he's pro-Russian in a way that I'm not saying he's a Russian apologist, just that his conclusions about the situation is that Russia is going to steamroll Ukraine, and he's saying that the Ukrainian government can't exist for more than 2 more months and that the situation is really dire. And so that's fueled a lot of the speculation about that the US seems to be turning around and being open to diplomacy. You had Mark Milley, I believe it was a few days ago, in a speech saying that Ukraine that this is our chance for peace this winter, that the escalations are going to go down, right? That the fighting is going to go down, that Ukraine can rest and rearm and get ready for more offensives in the spring. But now we have our chance. We've just retaken Kherson. The Ukrainian military has. We need to press the advantage now and sue for peace and come up with a negotiated settlement. But of course, you get the establishment like Blinken and what's left of Joe Biden and everyone else talking about, no, we're not listening to what Mark Milley says. The Ukrainians need to fight on and press on and not negotiate. So, but you do have some like you have the what was it? The CIA had, I'm forgetting his name, discussed with his Russian counterpart. Was that in Ankara in Turkey? They had some talks this week. I don't know exactly what's come of them, but Scott had a thread on Twitter today where he was saying how he was worried about these talks because it might mean that this war is going to get a lot more serious this winter.
Great. Just what we wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you think about, so Donald Trump announced he's running for president again last night, which was not surprising at all. I watched his whole speech. I was pretty underwhelmed, I can't lie. I mean, and I wanted him to run again. Like I want to see it. Like I think it's funny, but man, he's not the same guy he was 7 years ago when he announced the first time. And it's really interesting watching the right wing line up behind DeSantis and some still line up behind Trump. And I think that DeSantis is their dream candidate because he's got everything that most people like on the surface about Trump. Like he's got his kind of brash, tough guy personality, but then he's also, he's an institutionalized person through and through. He definitely is an imperialist through and through. If you look at his voting record while he was in Congress. So I feel like most people are going to prefer him, but it seems like some neoconish people are staying in line with Trump just in case he wins, because Trump really values loyalty. And so they know they could still stay in, his inner circle if they line up behind him. But what do you think? What are you hopeful at all for if the Republicans take things over, that things are going to go in a slightly different direction, or do you think they're going to be the same? I just talked with Jackson Hinkle earlier today. Very interesting guy, by the way. It was a really fun interview. And as much as I don't like Trump, and as much as I've criticized him, and as much as I, just blasted him while he was in office, because I think you should do that to anyone who's in office, even if Rand Paul became the president and he did something bad, I think everyone should be holding, their elected officials accountable. As much as I think he really fucked just about everything up 9 times out of 10, there was that one time out of 10 where he would do something that was like, whoa, that is definitely not what the neocons wanted to do. He obviously had a little bit of an incentive to be against just starting the next war and, just plowing straight ahead at all costs. Like he was talking to doing a lot of dumb shit, like airstriking Soleimani and, putting more troops in Afghanistan. But you could tell that there was something about him that was like, I don't know. I don't really feel like I'm that big on this, regardless of what it was, whether it was, you know, being super pro-Israel or super pro-Saudi Arabia or, super hawkish on Iran. Like he definitely had this ego thing where he liked to be the big tough guy in the room and he liked everyone to praise him all the time. So that seemed to be what ultimately led him to doing all this stupid shit. But you could tell there's a little inkling in the guy that was like, I'm not so sure about this, or this seems kind of dumb, where I don't see that at all with DeSantis. Like, I think he's the 10 out of 10 will do the bad thing that we wouldn't want him to do on a foreign policy level. And there's this, like, I don't think Trump's learned his lesson just based off the endorsements he's made and the way he's still acting and, the direction he's heading in already. I don't feel like he's learned his lesson at all. But there's a tiny part of me that's like, okay, what if this guy is really, really mad and he remembers that Netanyahu burned him and, congratulated Biden before the counts were done? Or who remembers that everyone lied to him about Syria and Afghanistan? Like, there's this little part of me that's like, man, it would be great if he got back in there and just went on a revenge tour and just started like tearing everything down. I don't think he will. I mean, like 98% sure he wouldn't, but there's like a tiny percent chance that I think he would compared to anyone else. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, like, electoral politics isn't really my forte, but I've really been at a loss in trying for, I don't know, a year now to try to figure out exactly how, as anti-war libertarians, we should treat the populace right. And I've wrote a lot of pieces on it. I mean, I think I would prefer Donald Trump to Ron DeSantis. Because I think we know what Trump is, and we think we have suspicions about what Ron DeSantis is, and a lot of them are very bad, at least in my opinion. I mean, there's a possibility he might have been the legal oversight for torture programs. Like, I was listening to Robbie Martin and Abby on Media Roots. Robbie was talking about the research that he's done into DeSantis's past because his military experience is just a big question mark. But I believe, and I'm going off of what Robbie said, but he said that DeSantis was like the legal counsel for the detainee program in Fallujah. So he was part of I think it was the JAG Corps, I would assume, but he was probably responsible either for the rules of engagement or for the handling of prisoners. And I don't know if Robbie said something about him being a legal advisor or counsel for the Guantanamo program. I'm not sure about that, so don't quote me on it. But I have these suspicions of his intelligence involvement. And so now in terms of Trump, yeah, I just don't know. Like, I'm really excited to see the battle between the two of them if it really gets to that. But some people have I don't know, speculated that Trump is getting in the campaign to catapult DeSantis's campaign. I don't know. That's just
it's all a big scheme, huh?
Yeah, it's for 12D chess, just speculative. So I don't really know.
Yeah, see, like I never thought that Trump was like official controlled opposition. I felt like he was an idiot who filled that role but I do think he is like legitimately a rogue character. I don't think he was supposed to be there and that he was supposed to beat Hillary Clinton. I think that was all by accident. And then they were like, okay, dumbass, now that you've won, sign this and sign this and sign this. And okay, now we're going to, and then they just kind of controlled him. But I could tell they still don't like him being in there. I mean, they obviously have some aversion to him. And it's because at the end of the day, he's just he's like playing a hot potato with an unpinned hand grenade. It's just like, oh my God, what is he going to do? So I'm not endorsing him, by the way, and I won't be campaigning for him and I won't vote for him. But if it comes down to DeSantis, Obama, or Trump at this point, I would absolutely take Trump because I think it's the more accelerationist thing now. Like I do think getting Biden in 2020 was more accelerationist than getting Trump reelected. But now that he'd be making a return and everything that's happened over the last couple of years, it absolutely seems like it would be more of, an apocalyptic thing if he got back in there. I don't know if he can win anymore. Like the midterms really shocked me with how everything turned out. I was expecting just a red sweep and we didn't get that. So I don't really know, I don't really know how to read the political landscape anymore. I thought I kind of had my finger on the pulse, but I guess not. But it's going to be interesting for sure to see how that all unfolds.
If I could, like the whole midterm thing, maybe some of the takeaways are, I've thought about this and I've heard some people saying this, that one, abortion matters a lot more to people than people think.
Yep.
Abortion rights, I'll put in quotes because I'm pro-life myself, but on the other hand, maybe it's a wholesale rejection of the importance of the culture war. Is that maybe to most people, the culture war is not the most important thing to them. And I think a lot of this hope behind the red wave was built behind these things like groomers, in elementary schools, that us living in online bubbles, we're so inundated with this, they're stealing your children and they're teaching them sex and they're going to make them gay and stuff like that and taking them to strip clubs. Maybe that really didn't resonate with people as much as it did with some. So,
yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, we're kind of in a bubble on Twitter and, interacting with the people we interact with. I mean, and Twitter and just being online in general tends to be magnetic toward the sensational, like that's more what gets drawn out online. So it's probably not an accurate representation of what people actually care about.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's just 1 or 2% of people in the entire country who are even aware of this strip club, the drag queen story hour stuff, or aware to the point of it where they're really mad about it because we see a video go viral on libs of TikTok and maybe it's just got 1 million views. Well, that's less than 1% of all Americans. I don't know. It's hard to keep things in perspective.
Yeah, it is. Well, thanks for coming on, man. Always good to talk to you. Hopefully we cross paths soon again. Like you said, we got to meet up twice this year. It's been great. Anything you want to plug that you got coming up? Any interesting episodes or any events you're going to or anything, or any final thoughts you want to add?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on again. We need to get together and shoot some guns again because I want to talk about that more on like the show, but it's not what I talk about on the show. So, but yeah, vitaldescent.com is the new website. It's a .com, which is great. Other than that, libertarianinstitute.org. I'm going out of town for Thanksgiving to my in-laws for like 10 days. So I'm going to be a little down and out a little bit, but trying to get content out before then and then hit it hard afterwards as well. So thanks, Reed.
Yeah. Well, you got to come to Pork Fest and then we'll go shooting for a whole day. I'll bring all my World War II guns and you can bring all yours and we'll film it and make a little like mini documentary out of it. So it'll be a good time.
Yeah, that'll be cool, man.
All right, man. Yeah, everyone, thank you for watching. If you're new to the show, please subscribe and make sure you go down, look in the description. I've got Patrick's. I got to actually, if you're watching this live on YouTube, I got to fix his Twitter because he changed his name from Liberty Weekly. So, nothing works anymore down there. So I got to relink his Twitter, but you got his YouTube, his website. And I also linked his documentary, Stain of the Century, where he actually goes over in depth the Uyghur situation that we were talking about at the beginning of the show. So please go check that out. That'll really give you a different perspective on it. That really shifted my perspective on it, because I remember for months I'd heard about it and I'd seen like Scott Horton being skeptical about it, but I didn't really know what was going on. I went and watched that documentary, and it's the best thing I've seen about it. So go check it out. And also follow me on all the other platforms in the link tree, because who knows how long I'll have YouTube. We'll catch you guys on the next episode.